because I'm not used to it. And yet I'm trying to be mindful, and I'm, thinking about my environment, but I'm also drawn back to the pleasure of distraction.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. The pleasure of distraction. And on a neurological level, that you see research that supports that idea. We have this, frankly, it's a bias towards distraction in our mind. And whenever we focus on something that's novel in our environment, our brain rewards us with a hit of dopamine, a pleasure chemical of our mind. And so we, go back to that example of us lying down in bed. We go to Instagram, we get a hit of dopamine. We check our email, we get a hit of dopamine. We go over to check the news, we get a hit of dopamine. And before we know it, we've kind of fallen into this loop of bouncing around between the same 5 or 6 applications. And it's because of this novelty bias. And this all of this dopamine coursing through our mind, it makes us so stimulated throughout the day. And I think, we talk about distractions quite a bit, and it's an easy thing to focus on because you think, oh, I can't get anything done, and there's so many distractions. That must be the problem. But I would argue that the problem is a bit deeper. And instead of distraction is kind of a symptom of the problem, but the deeper problem is just that we're so stimulated by default. Every time we focus on something that's new and novel, which our mind rewards us for focusing on because of this distraction bias, we reward ourselves and get accustomed to this higher level of stimulation. And so that when you find that you have a small moment in your day that you can just kind of let your mind be and wander a little bit and rest, you don't want to, because that involves adjusting downward into a lower level of stimulation. You go from, one of the most alarming statistics I encountered in writing the book was that on average, when we're working in front of a computer, we focus on one thing for just 40 seconds before we switch to focusing on something else.
Wow.
And it's remarkable. And so you observe this when you look on your phone. You bounce between apps 40 seconds. When you're on the computer, maybe you go from doing a report to doing email for 40 seconds. Then you go back to the website for 40 seconds, and you bounce between things every 40 seconds. And because we're switching through things so often, there's this pattern of fragmented attention that follows us and affects the quality of our attention throughout the day as well. And so it's frankly, it's the way our mind is wired, because, instead of hyper focusing on, it's because of our evolution. Instead of focusing on building a fire at the detriment of focusing on the saber-toothed tiger, the novel threat that was encroaching in on our environment, we noticed the threat, we dealt with the threat, we survived to live another day as well as build another fire. But of course, these days, the nearest tigers are at the zoo, and we're surrounded by things that are more novel than we've ever experienced before. And so, of course, we fall victim to it. It's only when we're often on a deadline that we focus on our work, because when something's on a deadline, it becomes more novel than a distraction.